Today, Benares is the most sacred city in all of India, as it has been for millennia. Even before the time of the Buddha, pilgrims came here to worship their gods and bathe in the holy river of heaven.
You see people purifying themselves, bathing in the Ganges. You see priests performing rituals. You see corpses, because that's the best place to end one's life. So you see going on there a great range of religious activity, and much of it of the type that does go back to the Buddha's time.
Many of today's sacred ceremonies on the Ganges echo the ancient practices of the Vedic priests, the Brahmins. In the Buddha's day, only the Brahmins could mediate between the gods and men. Only they could conduct the holy rituals that were said to preserve the universe itself. The Brahmin priests stood at the pinnacle of a rigid social hierarchy, a sacred system of caste. Beneath them were the warriors, the caste to which the Buddha belonged. Below them were farmers. At the bottom were the servants, and still lower, outcasts.
Those social groups are not merely social conventions, but rather they're hardwired into the nature of the universe. You're supposed to stay in that group, and the survival of society depends upon your continuing to perform the function associated with that social status.
Caste was irrelevant to the Buddha. So were priestly rituals to preserve the universe. His teachings focused on the universe within.
The Buddha said you could be from any caste. What makes you noble is if you understand reality. You know, if you're a good person, if you're a wise person, then you're noble.
In time, a devoted gathering of monks formed around the Buddha at Sarnath, near the Ganges. Broken stones and fallen pillars mark what remains of what grew to be a vibrant monastic community, the Sangha.
It took the Buddha many, many years to find his way, but he didn't want it to be so hard for people. And so he established a community who could live together and help one another.
In a ceremony evoking the beginning of the Buddha's own spiritual journey, fledgling monks of all ages say goodbye to their families and homes and join the Sangha.
Gacchami dutiyampi dhammam saranam gacchami. I go to the refuge of the Buddha, I go to the refuge of the Dhamma, and I go to the refuge of the Sangha. Sanghang Saranang Gacchami.
The Sangha is an embodiment of Buddha's experiential wisdom. What happens if people practice this thing? Are they truly happy or not? Are they joyful or not? So I think Buddha wanted to also leave a perfect example of his teaching, an alive teaching, a teaching that walks, a teaching that can talk, a teaching that can laugh. So I would say Sangha is just like a living example of Buddha's teaching.
The first Sangha was a radical institution, open to people of every caste and remarkable for the times in which the Buddha lived, to both men and women. The Buddha was part of a culture deeply suspicious of women.
The attitude towards women at the time was very critical, and many things were impossible for them. So that was a very revolutionary thing to do that in that times of India.
By ordaining women as nuns, the Buddha gave women the chance to escape the drudgery of daily life. Life was so hard for most women that entering the Sangha was a liberation, as we know from their ecstatic, heart-rending poems. So freed, so thoroughly freed am I from my pestle, my shameless husband and his sunshade making, my moldy old pot with its water snake smell. Aversion and passion I cut with a chop. Having come to the foot of a tree, I meditate, absorbed in the bliss. What bliss! Bliss, nirvana, the Buddha taught, could be found in the fleeting moment through the practice of meditation. The Buddha showed his followers how to come to terms with their own roiling thoughts and desires by paying attention to them, by becoming aware, becoming mindful. As an ancient poem counsels, like an archer, an arrow, the wise man steadies his trembling mind, a fickle and restless weapon.
Many times our mind is not peaceful enough. So we realize that perhaps we need to understand more about mind itself and how to balance the emotions, how to balance our mind and try to cultivate more happiness.
The difficulties come from within. One experiences unexpected things from one's mind. Most dangerous, skeptical doubts. Doubts about oneself, doubts about the Buddha. Physical is we can get from from the food and from the supplement of vitamins and and for the mind, this is the only way we have to. Only medicine.
Meditation is not about getting rid of anger, getting rid of lust, or getting rid of jealousy. Even while becoming monk, often we experience anger. It happens. It often happens when people start teasing you like a shaven, bald-headed person. But it gives a good chance for us to realize that, okay, let's see, this anger arises. What is it? What most often happens in our ordinary life is that whenever we experience these emotions, we get stuck into it. It starts twisting us. But Buddhism is going through inside it and getting out of it peacefully. And I think that gives us more joy. And that makes human life more full, more around. It's not like we are not living in partial truth, but it's like whole of things together.
It takes time to comprehend this. And then, by practicing again and again, the practitioner becomes very balanced, and one reaches a state of very strong equanimity. Equanimity towards the physical and mental objects. And this is the base camp for the summit.
enlightenment.
After washing my feet, a disciple said, I watched the water going down the drain. I am calm. I control my mind like a noble thoroughbred horse. Taking a lamp, I enter my cell. Thinking of sleep, I sit on my bed. I touch the wick, the lamp goes out. Nirvana. My mind is freed.
The mind is as restless as a monkey, the Buddha taught. Who you are, what you think of as yourself, is constantly changing. Like a river, endlessly flowing, one thing today, another tomorrow.
There's water in a river, then there's water in a glass, and then the water is back in the air, and then it's back in the river. The water's there, but what is it? That's a way to think about the self in Buddhism. One moment you're angry, the next moment you're laughing. Who are you?
A seed becomes a plant. Wisps of grass are spun into a rope. A trickling stream turns into a river.
The self comes and the self goes. Simply notice how from one moment to another, yourself is actually not as much the same as we think it is.
What the Buddha realizes is that if we can get rid of this fundamental misunderstanding of the nature of the self based on egotism, we won't cling to things, we won't screw up everything we do because we're thinking about it in the wrong way.
Once you stop centering your feelings about your feelings on yourself, what naturally arises is simple compassion. Compassion for your own suffering, compassion for the suffering of others.